So here we go. This is our last lesson in Judges. This is lesson 7. Yeah, chapters 17 through 21. And Gayan, I see you just like struggling with that.
This was a hard lesson, and I am really glad this is going to be over with this one. Just saying.
Yep, you're not alone. And it
Thank
was a hard lesson. And we're going to sort that all out and hopefully make some sense of it. Okay. So the thing is that we have to remember is that, and we talked about this at the beginning of Judges, is that 17 through 21 is like an epilogue to this book, right? It describes what things were like during the time of the judges. It's a big picture of what was happening in that culture during the time of the judges. So we have to put all of that we see in these chapters into that context, because it's, remember the phrase, there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And this is what happens when everyone does what is right in their own eyes. So the things that we see in these chapters are ugly and cruel and disgusting, but that's what was happening because everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. And there was no king, there was no ruler that was in charge of things. And so the lesson we want to take from that is that when we walk away from truth and into anarchy and just what we think, doing what we think is right, these are the things that can happen. Hopefully not as disgusting as what we saw here, okay? But certainly walk away into sin and into judgment. If we're not following the Lord, then these kinds of things can happen. So what we're going to do today, we're not going to look at all the details. We're not going to go like, and then what happened, and then how did this happen? There's a lot of details in these accounts. We're going to look at each account and take the main principles from this account. What's the main part of this story and what do we learn? We want to look, there's so many things that are wrong in these chapters. And that's what we want to identify.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
I was struck by the fact that in these chapters from 17 to 21, that there's no mention of any judge.
Right, because this is a summary of what happened. This happens. Okay, you're leading me right into the beginning of this, okay? Because we want to identify, when is this happening? When did these chapters take place? Okay, so what conclusion did you come to about when they take place? If any. Because you said there's no mention of a judge, right?
Correct.
Okay. So if you were to look at page, let me see. I think page 83 in your homework. It's towards the end, maybe on day 5. But it talks about, there were some hints in here about when these things took place.
There was.
Any thoughts on that before I help you?
Well, obviously it took place, well, not obviously, but prior to when the judges were coming, that God raised up judges because all this was going on.
Right.
Then why place it at the end of the book? Why don't they put it in chronological order? Help us out.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you. That was my feelings exactly. Why couldn't you just organize this chronologically and save us all the trouble? But historians have figured it out, you know, and I'm not a historian, but if you look at just some couple of things that it talks about, where in chapter 17 and 18, Dan, we'll look at these chapters, but Dan goes north and takes over some land north, okay? Now that happened during the time of Joshua. You'll see you can read about that in Joshua 23 and 24. So that took place during the time of Joshua, which comes before the judges. Okay, so that if you look at this chart, the dates of the judges, and you'll see right here under Othniel was the first judge, that it says that Dan, the tribe of Dan migrated. They migrated north. So this was during this time. So this is the beginning of Judges. Okay. And then also another hint is that Phineas was the high priest during this time. Okay. And you read that in chapter 20. Chapter 20, it says that during that time, and I'll find the verse, Phineas was the high priest. Oh, chapter 20, verse 28. And Phineas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days. So this was happening, and when Phineas was the high priest ruling at the time, at the beginning of the judges. If you go back to Joshua, when Joshua died, when Eleazar was the priest during the time of Joshua, and when he died, then it says that Phineas, his son, took over as the high priest, and that happened during the end of Joshua. So that's what tells us that these accounts in these chapters happened at the beginning of Judges. But it's written as a summary of the book to remind us that this is the kind of things that were going on because there was no king and because everybody did what was right in their own eyes. Okay, does that make sense? If not, just trust the historians.
At the risk of angering Jeannie further, I'm not even sure that 17 to 21 was in chronological order. Because of the fall of Dan and because of Benjamin, I'm not convinced that these 5 chapters are in chronological order themselves. Parts of them are.
Right.
17 and 18 are together, but I'm not sure that all 5 of these chapters are in chronological order. But they're just included. You call them an epilogue. It really is a prelude to what happened earlier in the book. But it doesn't really matter if it's in order, other than to say it's not in order. This is an explanation of why we took this previous walk through the judges. This is what necessitated it.
Right. You were breaking up a little bit there, Ron, but I think we caught it. Right, and it doesn't matter really if it's chronological or not. Okay, and you're right. 17 and 18 go together, and 20 and 21 go together. 19 and 21. It's another whole account of another event. Okay, so but that all happened early in the days of Judges. All right, so let's look at these chapters. And again, we're going to just pull out, the main account and then see how do we identify what was wrong? What was wrong here because everyone was doing what was right in their own eyes. So in chapter 17, in verses 1 through 6, we have the event, and I'm just going to kind of summarize it. It says there was a man in the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And Micah said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse, and also spoke it in my ears, behold, the silver is with me. I took it. So what do you have? First thing you see, what do you see about Micah here?
He stole from his mother.
Right, he's stealing from his mother. And what is her response to that?
She blessed her son for taking her silver.
Right, I mean, what would you have done to your sons if they had stolen from you? Oh my gosh, son, this is okay. Yeah, no, you're like, no, I wouldn't. There's gotta be consequences. All of you mothers are shaking your heads, no. No, that's not how this should have happened. But what did they do then between Micah and his mother? What did they do with that money?
They made an idol.
Nancy, were you saying something, Nancy Lindley?
Yeah, graven image. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But she also says, blessed be my son by the Lord. Already kind of pre-qualifying something.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah. And then they take some of this money, take it to the silversmith and have a graven image made. And look at verse 5.
Well, I think it's, the mother is confused, and maybe it's just a sign of the whole society confused. She says she's dedicating it to the Lord to make a graven image, and that doesn't make any sense.
Why does it not make sense?
That's not what the Lord wants her to do.
And how do you know that, Nancy? You're muted.
Oh, he said, make no graven image.
There you go. There you go.
Worship the Lord your God, not graven images.
Right. Right. So they take that money, and this is going to show up again later, isn't it? They take that money and they make a shrine. And then it says he ordained one of his sons who became priest. Any thoughts on that?
Then it becomes generational.
Mhm.
Say that again, Noella.
I said it becomes generational
Becomes generational. He ordained one of his
from
sons.
the mother to the son and then to his son.
Okay, we're gonna, in the next few verses, we're going to be introduced to a Levite. To a Levite. In the rest of this chapter, what happens? When the Levite comes to town, what happens?
Basically, Micah hires him to be his priest.
Mhm. So Micah hires him for what purpose?
Be his priest.
Okay, to be his priest.
Mhm.
To replace his son.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, what does he think will happen now that he has a Levite as a priest?
The Lord will prosper him.
Okay, so is it better is it a better priesthood than his son, and then you have a Levite who's a priest?
Mhm.
Okay, why does he think that? Let's look at some cross references about a Levite. What do we know about Levites? Okay, on page 76 and 77, we should get a composite picture of the Levites and what their role is.
The Levites were set apart from everyone else. They were on the Lord's side. They have no inheritance. They take what is the Lord as their inheritance. What is given to the Lord is given to them. They will go where they want and dwell where they want. And they will take nothing. That's what I got.
That's a good start, Jeannie. Anything else anybody saw?
They were anointed by God and chosen by God.
Mhm. What was their role?
to be to be in the temple.
Okay. What did you see in Numbers 3:6 about the Levites?
Is this where they had to wash their hands?
More specifically about not so much as washing their hands, but what was their role and who were they to serve?
They were to assist Aaron and his sons.
Right.
You're to be set apart as God's own, and they're substitutes given wholly to God in place of the firstborn requirement.
They also carried the Ark of the Covenant.
Right. Right.
I also thought it was interesting that it kept saying to bring the Levites near. Whoever it was that they were going to make the Levites or ordain as priests, it just kept saying over and over again in different passages to bring them near. But then to set apart and to carry out the Lord's commands, to carry out what God commanded them.
Yeah, it was supposed to be in the tabernacle, in the tent, set up for these personal.
And Ron mentioned Aaron, okay, in this where it's like they're supposed to serve Aaron. And Aaron was the priest, right? Where did the priests come from? Aaron was a Levite, correct? You have at the end of on page 77, you have a chart that gives you the lineage of Levites, the tribe of Levi, who are the priests. And then if you follow it down and you see that Aaron is a Levite, right? And if you look at the cross references, the priests were to come from the line of Aaron and his sons. Yeah. So priests were all to come from the line of Aaron. So if we go back to our story about Micah and his priest, does Micah have the authority to ordain a priest?
No.
And would he have the authority to ordain his son? Micah is not a Levite. So his son would not be in the line of Levites to even be a priest in the first place.
But he did what was right in his own eyes. We lost our teacher.
Yeah, I think our teacher's gone.
No.
Linda. Come back, Linda. Don't leave us in this mess.
Okay, hold on a second. I got kicked out.
You're back in.
Yeah, I had a meeting earlier and the same thing happened, so
Yeah.
hopefully it won't happen again.
So just to kind of sum it up, the Levites were to serve in the temple and they were to assist Aaron and the priests. And the priests could only come from the line of Aaron. And the Levites, as I think Jeannie said, they had no inheritance, but they were given, in Deuteronomy, it says they were given 48 cities throughout the land. So they were to live in those cities, 48 designated cities throughout the land that they could live in. And they could, they had property there that they could have a garden. Right? But that's where they were supposed to be. And the purpose for that was those cities were spread from top to bottom of the land of Israel. And the Levites were the teachers of the law. So they were supposed to be in those 48 cities teaching the truth to people. So their job was to teach the law and to assist the priests. So now, if we go back to this account of Micah ordaining his own priest, that's just doing what's right in his own eyes. And even when you have the Levite who is selling himself, he is doing what's right in his eyes.
Again, I see this whole story as, you know, they sort of knew that there was a God. They sort of knew what the jobs of the Levites were, but they, what do I want to say, perverted the whole thing so that they could do it like they wanted to do it, doing the things that were right in their own eyes.
I feel like this is where we see the, like you said, Nancy, how they perverted it, but like you see the bridge, the gap between the generation of Israelites who really held true and were honoring, well, we know that that's here or there, but you see that this is where they start to say like the lip service. We're going to give it to God, but we really don't know what that means. So we're just going to say that because it's what we've been always taught to say.
Right. Right. So there is, you know, a foundation of they know the right thing. They know God and they have been taught, right? From when they came out of Exodus, you know, God taught them in the wilderness, and then in Deuteronomy when the new generation goes in. But remember that in the beginning of Judges, it said, then arose a generation who did not know God or the things that he had done. Okay. So that's where we find ourselves. So how important is it for them to be taught truth, and how important is it for the Levites to be in those 48 cities teaching the truth? So you have a rogue Levite who is just going off on his own and selling himself as a priest to Micah and his family. There's nothing right about that. Nothing right about that.
It's really no wonder that they keep falling into that cycle of just losing their faith.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They had a lot of cooperation in doing wrong between themselves and the Levites themselves.
Right. Right. The Levites, who should have been the standard bearers, so to speak, were the ones. Here's this Levite just going off and doing what seems right in his own eyes, making some money for himself.
But if I understand this correctly, the Levite was also in the house where the idols were and the carved images and the ephod that Micah made for himself.
Right. And with this ephod, remember what the ephod was? We looked at it in a different lesson. Anybody remember it?
Well, it was supposed to be part of the breastplate of the high priest.
It was
that had all of the tribes inscribed on it, correct?
right. And it was a piece of that garment that they would use to seek guidance from God. So you can see what Micah is doing. He has the ephod. He has a silver coated shrine, graven image. He has a priest. He is trying in all these ways to gain favor from God, doing what's right in his own eyes. But what about God? How does God see that? It's violating every single thing that God taught them, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, I guess, you know, how do we try to seek God? Is there anything that we do that could parallel with what Micah's trying to do to gain favor from God?
I'm not sure parallels what Micah was doing, but I think sometimes we have a tendency to replace our good deeds with trying to please God.
Good deeds, right. That's a good one. So let's move on to chapter 18. 18. And this is the account of where Dan moves north and takes over some country for their tribe. And we want to look again just at the first couple of verses, because it says, it starts out again. And remember, this happens early on in Judges. Okay? It says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of Dan was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in. For until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. Okay. Now, let's take a look at that. Why are they trying to find a place for their tribe to live? Anybody remember what happened when they moved into the land and everybody had their appointed space and they were supposed to go in and drive out
The
the
inhabitants.
enemy?
Mhm.
Okay, so do you remember what happened with Dan? We saw all those, and Joshua, Judah drove out them, and Ephraim drove out, and all these places, they drove out the enemy. But it says, but with Dan, they let the Amorites drive them back into the hill country, because they did not drive out the enemy. And now they're looking for a place to reside because the Amorites have driven them out. So there's the first thing. They didn't drive out the enemy as they were supposed to do. They allowed the enemy to conquer them. So now they're moving north. And when they go north, they come to Micah's house. They come to Micah's house. And what do they find there?
The Levite.
Okay, the Levite. So tell me about what happens with the Levite and with the ambassadors from Dan.
Well, so it looks like the Levite explained what he was doing there, that he had been hired. And so then the men from Dan turned to him right away and said, ask the Lord if this journey is correct, if we're supposed to be coming here and fighting this war.
And so what was the answer?
Continue on in your journey. It's
The
it's
Levite
all
said,
right
sure,
according to the eye of the Lord.
Mhm.
Now they're all mixed up.
So in the end, yes. And in the end, what does Dan end up doing with that Levite?
Kidnapping him. They took him with them.
Okay, was that you talking?
It was. I said they kidnapped him. And took him with
Yeah,
them.
my infant.
Well, and not
Right,
only the
right. So,
only the
and what was-
Levite, but they stole the images and the ephod and all of those symbols that they thought was what was leading to God.
Right, so they took the priests and they took all the images, they took everything, and they're like, come with us, because they offered him a better job, didn't they? Wouldn't you rather be a Levite, a priest over a whole tribe rather than just one family? So they bumped him up, you know, they offered him a better job. But they took all of the images, and it says they set them up. Verse 31, so they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was in Shiloh. So the thing is, you have, if you look at your map, and at the very north, you see where it says Dan. That's the city that they overtook. They slaughtered these people, this harmless people, and took that land for their own when they should have taken it from the Amorites. So from the north, that's where they took this. They have the graven image that they're setting up as their shrine for God. It says, as long as the house of God was in Shiloh, which look down at just above the Dead Sea, and you see Shiloh, and that's where maybe the Ark of the Covenant was, and that's where the house of God was. But they have set up their image to represent the house of God. They are worshiping this graven image. That was made from the $200, so to speak, from the stolen money that Micah took from his mother. So that they've made this is that same image, okay, from its very beginnings, and it's set up, and that they're going to worship. This is also Dan, and that image that is the beginning of maybe not the very beginning, but when the kingdom splits and Jeroboam is the first king, Jeroboam builds a temple in Dan and sets up idol worship. So they have the little idol worship going right there now. And then Jeroboam, when he comes, he builds a temple because he says, oh, it's too far for you to go from Dan down to Jerusalem to worship. So we'll just build a temple here. So this is the beginnings of that. And that whole northern kingdom collapsed. Okay. So I want to back up before we leave chapter 18, look at verse 24, because Micah, when he finds out that they have taken everything and he comes after them, what does he say in verse 23 and 24? He comes to confront them, and he said to them, you take my gods that I made and the priest, and you go away. And what have I left? What have I left? I might get kicked out again here soon. What do you think about that? You've taken the gods that I made and my priests, and now what do I have? What do you think?
Pretty sad.
Again, we see that he felt like the Lord was gone from him because the images were gone, which was just all mixed up thinking.
Right, right. He had put his faith in these images instead of in God. And now they're gone, and now he's like, I have nothing. You're right, it's sad. It's just not, it's not true. It's not the truth, because he wasn't worshiping God, he was worshiping the image. And so think about what happens when people worship, say like Noella was talking about the deeds. We do all these good deeds. What happens when you find out that those good deeds get you nowhere?
Yeah, usually the the reward for good deeds is a big old thank you. Let's throw you a banquet because you did such good deeds. And if nobody recognized you, then you think, well, you know, what good was it? And it's true. That's the only thing that's good of doing good deeds just for the sake of good deeds.
Yeah. Anything you worship other than God is just going to be hollow. It's hollow, and it can be taken away. And then you're like, Micah, well, what do I have now? What do I have? Nothing. So that's Dan. Let's look at Judges 19. And Judges 19, we're just going to really, Judges 19 just sets up what happens in Judges 20 and 21. So this is the most gruesome part of these 5 chapters. This is the story of the Levite who has a concubine. It says, in those days, but there was no king in Israel. A certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim. That's again in the north. And he took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem and was there some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. In the first place, should this Levite have had a concubine? Okay, every head is shaking no. So there's where it all starts. Okay. So when he goes back to get her, and you know how this, you know the story, the father says, just stay here another day, stay another day, stay another day. And then they leave and they go into a city in Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. Okay. And overnight, the concubine is killed. And in the morning, when he goes to leave, when the Levite goes to leave, he finds her dead on the doorstep. And then at the end of that chapter, it says that he cut her up in pieces, 12 pieces, and sent them out to the 12 tribes of Israel. And in verse 30, and he says, and all who saw it, so each tribe got a piece of this concubine. And when they saw it, it says, such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Until this day. This was the most horrendous thing that had ever happened. So now that brings us to chapter 20. I know there's a lot of things you'd like to talk about in that 19 chapter, but it's what happened that sets up the solution, okay, in chapter 20. So the concubine has been killed. Each tribe in Israel has gotten a piece of her, and they're like, this is outrageous. This is an abomination, and it is outrageous. And so the Levite says, what are you going to do? All Israel gathers at Mizpah, and he says, what are you going to do? So let's look at what their solution is. What do they decide needs to be done?
They're going to take revenge on the Benjamites.
Okay.
Which are really their own people, right?
Exactly. We're talking, Benjamin is one of the 12 tribes. So this is going to be a civil war. But what did they first do? What did they first do with Benjamin? They all agreed that this has to be taken care of. Okay. It was evil. It was an abomination. It was an outrage. And they say, we are one. We will gather as one and we will go against them.
They wanted to get the full story about the Levites.
Say that again, Noella.
They wanted to get the full story so that they understood exactly what happened.
Yeah, they did. They got the full story from the Levite, and then they all say, we have to do something. And they go, look at verse 12. Hmm. 12 and 13.
Yeah, they're trying to talk the tribe of Benjamin into turning over the people who had done the evil thing. But the Benjaminites would not even listen to them.
Okay, and what are your thoughts about that?
They're protecting murderers, and the reason she ended up in the outside in the first place was because of homosexuality that was going on. And so you have sin on top of sin, and they're trying to protect their own people from that. Sad, really sad.
And so because of that, they went to war. The 11 tribes against Benjamin. Now, here's an interesting part of this to me. Okay, so let's look at this. So now they're going to go to war. So it gives all the numbers of the men from Benjamin, and then from the other tribes. And look at verse 18, because before they go to war, it says that the people of Israel went up to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first to fight against the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go first. And what happened in that first attack?
They were defeated.
Who was defeated?
People of
Benjamin?
Mm-mm.
No, not Benjamin.
The men of Judah or Israel.
Israel, right. The whole of Israel, they lost 22,000. Okay. Now, look at verse 23. So they go up and they weep before the Lord until the evening, and then they ask God again, shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? And God says, yes, go. And what happened?
defeated again.
They were defeated again. They were defeated again. And then look at verse 26. Then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And then they asked God, they inquired of the Lord, for the Ark of the Covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas, the priest, the true priest, was there. And they asked, shall we go out one more battle against our brothers and the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. And he did. Okay? And he did. So thinking about this, why do you think that they were not successful in the first round? Why did God have them go 3 different times against Benjamin?
I think when they offered the burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord, they were asking for forgiveness of their sin. I think that was the first time they had done that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. if you look at the progression each time they went to God, okay, and this last time, I think, Carol, that's one of the main things is like they are asking for forgiveness for their sin. Think about this in the big picture. It says in those days, there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It wasn't just the tribe of Benjamin. And this is just my own thinking, but I'm thinking the sin of Benjamin affects everybody. It affects everybody. And those 11 tribes were not free of guilt of sin of some kind, probably idol worshiping and everything. So, was God trying to get them to see that they're as guilty as Benjamin in some ways? Not for this particular incident, but they were not pure and holy themselves. And that sin of Benjamin might have just been a wake-up call to everybody. But certainly they had consequences. All of Israel had consequences. 65,000 men died because of sin. So it was just interesting when I noted every time they went to God, they asked him the first time, and then the second time it said they wept for God until evening, and then the third time they offered sacrifices and repenting. So take that for what it's worth, but I just feel like that's a big picture of sin and how it affects other people.
Yeah, it's consistent through Judges too about crying and crying out to God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your heart of repentance.
Right. Right.
Chapter of God listening and sending help.
I think sometimes that when we step out on our own and we think that we have to do something, and so we go to battle against something, so as to speak, and we fail, that it takes the failure for us to understand that we don't stand alone, that we don't win when we don't have God on our side. And as soon as they failed and then failed and suffered terrible consequences, then they found out, and God simply said, I will win the battle for you.
Mm-hmm.
He was there all of the time. It reminded me of the verse of song that says, oh, what trials, oh, what we often suffer, all because we do not go to God in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
This is a picture of us sometimes. We try it on our own and we fail.
Right. Right. And that's what we want to learn from all of these things, that we see in scripture is we're not unlike them. And so the warning to us, is like, yeah, listen to God, be obedient from the first place. You have in this Dan, we just looked at Dan and how Dan had set up idols and hired their own priest. Well, they're not innocent in this whole thing, right? So this is across the board. Israel was doing what was right in their own eyes. So this whole thing with Benjamin is such a reminder just of the cost of sin, the cost of not asking God, the cost of just like you say, Noella, like going on your own and trying to resolve things. And it's just a good lesson for us to remember. Don't set up your idol. Don't set up an idol. Just worship God and ask him, follow his leading. Do the right thing, not in his eyes, not in your own eyes. So we just have a couple minutes here, but we want to look at chapter 21 because now after they have killed off all of the men of Benjamin except for 600, right? And now they're feeling like, oh goodness, there's one tribe of Israel that is almost destroyed, totally extinct. And we can't have that. We can't have that. So now they're feeling remorseful about the tribe of Benjamin being wiped out. So they have, what is their plan then to get wives for these 600 men, the Benjamites?
It wasn't to ask God for help.
Say that again.
I said they didn't ask God for help.
They didn't ask God for them.
For help.
Yep. They just developed a plan. So the thing that causes the issue here is because it starts out, it says, now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah when they had all gathered together at Mizpah, said, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. So they all made a vow. Now, remember the vow of Jephthah? When he didn't think it through, he made a vow and said, whatever comes out my door, if you give me victory, remember that? So vows are very important. And now they've all made a vow that none of them will give any of their women to Benjamin for wives. So now they've got an issue because otherwise the tribe of Benjamin is just going to be gone. So what do?
They hatch a plan.
So let me just kind of sum this chapter up because it says, if they do, it says the people of Israel said, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up to the assembly of the Lord? When they all came together at Mizpah, which did not come up to the assembly of the Lord? And they discovered that the people from Gibeah had not come. Am I right, Gibeah?
Jabesh.
Gilead, sorry. So they did not make that vow. Okay. So they go and they kill off everybody except these 400 virgin women and take them to be the wives of Benjamite, the 600 Benjamite men. So there's scheming going on here. Okay. They're trying to work around this vow that they made. And they're saying, well, these people didn't make that vow, so we'll take their women and give them to Benjamin. But then they still had 200, they still needed 200 more. This is a crazy thing, okay? So they still needed 200 more women for Benjamin. So what did they say? How are they going to get them?
They compromise.
What about the dancing women? See those dancing women?
Yes.
Okay, there's a festival coming and these women are going to be coming out to dance. And it says, you, Benjamin, go hide and wait for them and let's take a woman. So what they're saying is, we can't give them, but you can take them. And then you're not breaking a vow. This little scheming, okay? So that's how they did it. It's like, it was all wrong. It was all just doing what they thought was right in their own eyes. So this
I have to jump off, but I wanted to just say real quick, this whole thing about the vows. First of all, my notes are just full of like there's just left and right. But the fact that there had to be death, there had to be blood, there had to be war for the vow to be fulfilled. Like, even if it's a vow of man, they still had to kill in order to fulfill their vow. And I just thought that was, once again,
Yeah. Yep. thank you, Jeannie. And yeah, I know you're going to be happy that we're done with this book too. Yeah, but but it's just, this is what happens. This is what happens when there's just anarchy, because there's no one in control and everybody does what's right in their own eyes. And I mean, I just want to give you some statements here about our times and the times of the judges. It says, people are not impressed with reason and logic. Not impressed with reason and logic. People disdain authority. We are seeing that big time right now in our country. They disdain authority. You're not going to tell me what to do. The family unit is no longer important. It's all about the individual. It's what do I want? What do I want? There's no absolute truth, and all cultures are acceptable. So those are things to think about. And what are we to do then in these times? I think we need to be like the Levites in the 48 cities. We need to take that role as a Levite. And First Peter tells us we are all priests and Levites, right? And we need to take that and be in our cities and be teaching the truth and be countering what's going on and when people are doing what's right in their own eyes. So that's how we're going to end the book of Judges. We're going to all go and be Levites in our 48 cities. Okay. And not, when you do what's right in your own eyes, it is not right in the eyes of God. So there will be consequences. There will be consequences.